Welcome everybody to Glasgow, Caledonian. My name is Rachel Baker. I'm the Director of the Unit Centre for Social Business and Health here at GCU, and for the last 6 months I have been sharing with Professor Anita Simmers the interim role of Pro-Vice-Chancellor for Research. And I'll say that during that 6 months, introducing the Professorial Lectures has been absolutely the best part of the job, and I got that half, Anita, sorry about that. I'm delighted to be here introducing the lecture tonight. I'm doing so in place of Professor Andrew Nelson, who's our PhD researcher, and we are handing back to Andrew, but I'm happy to be able to hold on to this part of the job for a bit longer so that I can introduce Professor Helen Gallagher. I'm just here for 5 minutes at the start before our headline act, and I'll come back and help out with the Q&A. And before I introduce Helen, I'm just going to say a few words about the importance and purpose of professorial lectures. The Professorial Lecture series reflects the public role of universities, and for GCU and the University for the Common Good, that's about how our research and teaching speaks to the Sustainable Development Goals that were introduced by the United Nations in 2015. Helen's work most obviously speaks to SDG number 3. So for those of you of all 17 committed to memory, that's about improving health and well-being. And professorial lectures are also an opportunity for recently promoted professors to showcase their work, talk about their career achievements and their journey to colleagues, to partners and stakeholders, and of course to family and friends. And I'm really pleased to welcome all of you here tonight. Helen has with her her partner Irvin, her son Matt, and Irvin's daughter Holly, and you're particularly welcome to GCU. And now let me introduce Helen. Helen Gallagher is Professor of Learning and Teaching and Vice Dean in the School of Health and Life Sciences. By way of background, she qualified as a radiographer in diagnostic imaging in 1989. Through several posts, ended up specialising in neuroimaging, pursuing a career as a research radiographer then at the Institute of Neurology, University College London. Using advanced MRI to study long-term neurological conditions such as multiple sclerosis, epilepsy and stroke. She's got an MSc in clinical neuroscience from the University of Surrey, and then in 1996, having broadened her experience to functional neuroimaging, rising to superintendent radiographer, she then was awarded her PhD in 2002 from UCL, with a thesis entitled Investigating the Neural Correlates of Theory of Mind. She came to us at GCU in 2002 as a senior lecturer and joined later the senior management group of the school, achieving recognition as a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy in 2017 for her academic leadership. Then assumed the role of Assistant Vice Principal Health and Wellbeing in 2018. In that role, the AVP role, she engendered a GCU mental health action plan, developing and delivering a framework for health and wellbeing that lays the foundations of the positive culture and conversations that we can have around that today. Helen's a passionate advocate of all allied health professions, no matter how large or small, and she contributes to the national agenda, working with key stakeholders in government, health boards and the third sector. She positioned the School of Health, and was part of the team, positioning the School of Health well for coping with the placement challenges during the COVID-19 pandemic, recognising the particular nuances and complexities of each professional discipline. Outside of work, Helen likes travelling, and she and her partner are keen bikers, albeit I'm told fair weather bikers. She loves to visit the Highlands and Islands on a Honda NC 750. In this lecture, we're going to hear something about the move from clinical to research radiographer, about the opportunities that Helen's made the most of as part of her career journey, including work on an Erasmus Plus project on internationalisation of the curriculum. Helen's current focus is on academic leadership, to enhance the student experience and attainment of graduate attributes. She's going to describe her academic journey and talk about some of the people I think that have inspired you along the way. So tonight we're celebrating this latest of Helen's career achievements as Professor of Learning and Teaching at Glasgow Caledonian. So please join me in welcoming to the floor to talk about from neuroimaging to academic leadership, an unexpected journey, Professor Helen Gallagher.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome everybody to my unexpected journey. I've called it this, not just because I'm a fan of The Hobbit and because I wanted to use a really fancy font, but because my path to becoming a Professor of Learning and Teaching has been entirely unexpected. There was never a plan, and if you don't believe me, then over the next 40 minutes you will see that my career has constituted leaping from one serendipitous opportunity to the next, so brace yourselves. Right, so we'll start at the beginning. I was the middle child of Irene and David Gallagher, who met each other both when they worked as bank clerks within the Midland Bank. This is me with the self-cut fringe in the middle and the sticky ears. That's my sister on the end and my brother David. They're going to be delighted when they see the video of this. It's fantastic. So in addition to bringing up the three of us, my parents were foster parents. And often that was short-term placements of babies. But a few of them were longer term, and that later led to us adopting firstly John, and then Kirsty and Peter. Yeah. So suffice to say, my childhood was surrounded by love, encouragement, and a lot of babies. My parents endowed me with my values and my work ethic. And I say this because I think that values sit at the heart of leadership, and they determine our success and our effectiveness. As I said before, my parents were bankers, and my brother went on to become an accountant, but having hero worshipped my sister, Jane, my entire life, I followed her into healthcare. My sister Jane is a paediatric nurse, and she's one of these people that's got that natural ability to build rapport with very sick children and all their families. I would say I was a little bit more socially awkward than she was. I was quite science and technology minded. I was good at physics and maths, so I decided to study radiography at the London Hospital. It didn't look like this when I was there. They have changed the name of it. So I wanted to have one at least with the correct name, which you can't even see anyway. But yeah, her minds were a little bit different by the time I was there. The qualification to become a radiographer at the time was called the Diploma of the College of Radiographers. It was a very different type of learning to what we currently do in the degree programs now. It was very didactic, and there was quite a regimented curriculum. But my dean spoke with so much passion about the importance of diagnostic imaging to the patient journey, and it instilled in me a similar passion, particularly for things like anatomy and pathophysiology, and the relationship between function and what was quite often the case, dysfunction. The profession of radiography has moved on significantly since I completed my degree, not just as a consequence of the advances in technology, but also in terms of the scope of practice, the degree of autonomy that radiographers have these days, and also the level of respect that they have gained or now earn as part of the multidisciplinary healthcare team. Much of this, I would say, is down to the people like those from my old radiography team who've helped to push the boundaries of the curriculum and engender greater visibility of the previously untapped expertise that our profession has, for which I'm really proud. So after qualifying, I had various roles in radiography across London, but also in Sydney, Australia. But my journey eventually took me to Queen's Square, London, to the National Hospital for Neurology and Neurosurgery. Here I became fascinated by different clinical case studies and the seemingly incongruent signs and symptoms that manifest in patients and how these related to their image appearance. One of my neurology colleagues gave me the Oliver Sacks book, and I think they gave me it so that it would shut me up a little bit, because I asked an awful lot of questions. I really loved this book, and it inspired me to want to learn a lot more about neurology, neuropathology, and so I looked around for master's degree opportunities, and I ended up registering for the MSc Clinical Neuroscience programme at Wylands College, which was part of the University of Surrey at the time. Around the same time, a new opportunity arose as a research radiographer in the Institute of Neurology, which I applied for and was successful for. The Institute of Neurology is that rather ugly concrete building at the other side of the hospital, unfortunately. When I was in this role, though, I led the imaging arm of a multi-site treatment trial across Europe for beta interferon on patients with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis. This was actually my first time working in MRI, and it gave me my first experience of clinical trials research. In the 2 years that I worked in that laboratory, I completed my MSc, and at the same time, another opportunity arose at the other side of Queen Square, and that was in the Wellcome Department of Cognitive Neurology. And that's a research lab, probably chosen the wrong place to put that on the screen, sorry. That's a research lab that's dedicated to the mapping of the functions of the human brain using functional imaging techniques. I'd wanted to utilise my neuroscience underpinning as well as my research radiography skills. So I spoke to the dean at the time, and that was Professor Richard Foucault. He's been a strong advocate of mine, and he was the person that encouraged me to do a PhD. Richard actually gave me free rein to find a project that aligned with any of the core research within that lab. It was a huge privilege, I felt, and in fact it's an act that was practically unheard of, I think. I found myself being drawn to the work of Professor Chris Frith. I can't say that when you've got a dry mouth. His work was around social cognition and executive functions, and he was keen to pass on to me an idea for a project that he had been working on with his wife, Professor Uta Frith, who worked in a different lab within UCL. First of all, though, a quick crash course in human brain mapping and functional imaging. So, recognition that different areas of the brain perform different functions has predated modern imaging techniques. Case studies of brain injury and the loss of specific functions have contributed to this knowledge base. One of my favourite neuropsychology stories, and possibly the first to be well documented, was that of Vas Gage, who was an American railroad construction foreman in the late 1840s. So Phineas suffered a life-changing brain injury when an accidental explosion blasted an iron tamping rod through his left cheek, behind his left eye, and through the right and left frontal parts of his frontal lobe of his skull. And the tamping rod then exited his skull and, like a javelin, continued its trajectory for another 80 feet. This is basically the trajectory through the brain of the image as it's been depicted. Obviously, they didn't have scanners at the time. Gage's injury, he survived this injury. He was actually initially thrown backwards and he suffered convulsions, but only a few minutes later was able to stand up, speak, and walk with some assistance to a wee cart that took him away for some medical assistance. So his motor and speech function remained intact, but the impact of the accident on his personality was more profound. He went from being well-liked and professionally successful to fitful, irreverent, and gross and profane, showing little deference for his fellows. And sadly, he was unable to keep his job. We now know, though, that the prefrontal lobes are the seat of neural networks that determine our personalities, including functions such as problem-solving, spontaneity, social and sexual behaviour, impulse control, just to name a few. Whereas the areas of the brain that are involved in motor control sit further back in the frontal lobe, just in front of the precentral gyrus, so wouldn't have been affected at all by that particular injury. So Gage's case is famous in the field as it shows both the resilience of the human brain and illustrates how certain areas of the brain have different functions and they contribute to our personality. The advent of histology has enabled the cortex of the brain to be divided up into different regions as determined by differences in cell structure, and these are now known as Brodmann areas. But in order to understand the functions of each of these areas, you need to have advanced imaging techniques such as magnetic resonance imaging or positron emission tomography. There are other imaging technologies that can be used, but these are the ones that I used and the ones I'm most familiar with. So how can we image brain function? Unlike in diagnostic imaging, where you ask a patient to relax and close their eyes, in functional imaging, you ask the participant to perform different tasks. So when they're performing a task, neurons in that are working in that area fire, and they draw on oxygen and nutrients. The circulatory system of the brain reacts to this by sending the region an excess of highly oxygenated blood. And as a result of the magnetic characteristics of hemoglobin, which as you know contains iron, oxygenated blood has a different magnetic signature to deoxygenated blood. Therefore, with the right imaging protocol, an MRI scanner is able to detect the difference in the blood oxygen level. However, in order to ensure the function of interest can be isolated from all of the other processes that are going on in the brain, it's necessary to compare and contrast activity across multiple tasks. At its most basic then, this would be two tasks. One that embodies the function of interest, and a control task that mirrors that task, but without that inclusion of that function. And in this way, when the brain activity from the control task is subtracted from the task of interest, you are left with a map of activity specific to the function of interest. So my area of interest was in social cognition, following the work of Chris Frith and Uta Frith. Uta Frith has devoted her professional life to the study of autism and understanding the behaviours of children and adults with autism. I think that, to some extent, reading her work, I recognised that certainly many of the traits that are described resonated with my own experience of social awkwardness as a child, and my continued and profound ability to commit faux pas. So I did find the area particularly fascinating. Autism is a biologically based disorder, and it's characterised by a triad of impairments. These are problems in communication, problems in socialisation, and imagination. Uta had theorised that the co-occurrence of these three deficits can be accounted for in the impairment of something that's called theory of mind, or it's also known as mentalising. So theory of mind is an innate ability that enables you to understand, explain, and predict the behaviours of others by attributing to them thoughts, knowledge, beliefs, and desires independent from your own. Just to illustrate this, there's a simple test that is undertaken on 4 and 5-year-olds, because it's around this time that most children would develop this innate ability. So the Sally-Ann test is quite simple. You have 2 dolls. One is called Sally, one is called Anne. Sally has a basket, Anne has a box. Sally puts a ball in her basket, and then she wanders off. While she's away, Anne moves the ball from the basket into her box. So the next question, which is where will Sally look for the ball, is called a belief question. Overall, children under the age of 4 and children with autism of older ages as well answer the belief question with Anne's box. They use their own knowledge of where the ball is, and they're seemingly unaware that Sally does not know that her ball has been moved. So theory of mind ability allows people to infer intentions of others. It's important skills for navigating social interactions, which can be quite complex and can be quite fraught. So by being able to develop accurate ideas about what other people are thinking, we're better able to respond accordingly. Theory of mind is an automatic, high-level, and almost without exception, a human function. And as I say, it develops around the ages of 4 or 5. So the purpose of my thesis was to isolate the areas of the brain that are involved in the processing theory of mind using functional imaging modalities. There was considerable overlap between the work that Uta did and Chris did. So Chris's work was related to consciousness and executive function. So Chris became my primary supervisor. So in 1997, I found myself registering for a part-time PhD in the University College London with a thesis entitled The Neural Correlates of the Theory of Mind. Around 10 months later, my son Matt came along just out of nowhere. Delighted that this picked us up too. He became my motivation for persevering with my PhD. And as anyone who has done a part-time PhD will know, that it can be a bit of a tough gig at times. But he was the main force driving me to succeed so that I could open up my career opportunities in the future. So the first study I chose to do sought to compare theory of mind ability across two different modalities, verbal and non-verbal. To do this, I used a combination of stories and cartoons. My control task in these instances were considered non-theory of mind stories and cartoons as well. Here's a couple of examples. So I won't read them out to you, but in order to answer the question of the non-theory of mind, at the end of the non-theory of mind story, you just need to apply logic. But in order to answer the question at the end of the theory of mind story, you have to understand what Jim is thinking or believing about his brother, that he's a liar, pants on fire. So similarly with the cartoons, in order to understand the joke behind the non-theory of mind cartoons, or to understand what's silly about it, you don't need to know what's going on in the head of anybody in the actual images. Whereas in order to understand the joke in the theory of mind, you have to recognize that there's a misunderstanding or a lack of awareness in one of the protagonists of in the cartoon. So in this case, it's the bird that doesn't recognize that that's a big wide-mouthed frog with pretending to be a bird there. And this one, this poor guy doesn't understand why these guys are laughing because he doesn't know that they've drawn ink around the end of his telescope. They're not as funny when I explain them. I do understand them, but it's just for the benefit of this. So these are mostly Gary Larson cartoons, just as a postal. Other cartoonists are available, just for that. So what did we find when we did this study? So when we compared theory of mind stories and cartoons against non-theory of mind stories and cartoons, we activated a whole range of different regions which we now know to be considered the social brain. But when we compared the theory of mind with the stories against the cartoons, what we found is the activation of one single area, which is the paracingulate cortex. So this is an image of the brain, which is basically a slice through the center of the brain in this direction. The coronal is taken about this sort of area here, and this is an axial image, which is around about this level here. And so the activation that you can see there, that's in the area that just falls down between the two hemispheres, and it's on the right and left. And if you remember the image from the Vas Gage picture, you can see that that's probably the area that was affected by his brain injury. Though I had to link that back eventually. So my next study was called Imaging the Intentional Stance. And what we're trying to do here was identify the areas of the brain that are activated when somebody is trying to figure out somebody else's intentions. And we did this using a very simple game known as rock, paper, scissors that you'll all be familiar with. What I asked participants to do was 3 different conditions. So they had to play rock, paper, scissors in 3 different modes. One of the modes, the random selection mode, they were told that they were playing against a random sequence. So they weren't trying to beat it, they weren't trying to strategize, they just had to randomly generate their own responses. And that utilized activities of working memory, response selection, and random generation. The next condition, we told them that they were playing against a computer that was applying a rule. So they were trying to beat the computer, which also led on pattern abstraction and strategy. And then the final condition was the intentional stance condition, where they were told that they were playing against me. So they were trying to strategize against me and guess what my intentions were. In fact, they were playing against a random sequence every single time, which we told them afterwards, just for an ethical perspective. But nevertheless, what did we find? Well, we found that there was one single area of activation that was this anterior portion of the paracingulate cortex, which we now know is associated with mentalizing. So this appears to be the key area to mediate mentalizing. My final set of experiments related to gesturing. And the reason I chose this is because autistic children and adults have trouble understanding non-verbal cues. So I wanted to have a look to see whether there were differences in the way they processed biological gestures. So we compared expressive gestures, which we considered to be gestures that express some sort of emotion or feeling, against instrumental gestures that were considered to be more instructional. I used videos of these gestures, of me doing them, and blurred out the face so that we could get rid of any facial expression as cues. And we piloted these gestures on a whole bunch of adults to ensure that they were, first of all, easily recognizable and that they were truly expressive and instrumental. I then took the most clear-cut of these and trialled them on a group of children with autism and also a group of non-neurodiverse children. And what we found in this was that the children with autism were better able to understand and name the instrumental gestures rather than the expressive gestures, whereas the neurodiverse children performed equally well on both types of conditions. When we took that into the scanner with a bunch of normal adults, what we found was that there were two different neural networks that were involved in the perception of these different types of gestures. The expressive gestures activated areas that had previously been implicated in the social brain. The anterior paracingulate cortex, the right superior temporal sulcus, and the temporal poles bilaterally. There's no test at the end of this. Suggesting, though, that these three regions form part of the network involved in processing the intentions of biological agents. In contrast, the instrumental gestures involved a left lateralized system, which is usually associated with language and imitation. And we speculated that when you learn or develop your understanding of these types of gestures, the instrumental gestures are probably accompanied by some sort of verbal command, like come here or go over there or turn around. So we thought that made sense, that there was a sort of language network involved in that understanding. But the involvement of the anterior paracingulate cortex in the processing of the expressive gestures suggests that mentalizing is indeed necessary for recognition of these gestures, and it also accounts for that marked impairment that the autistic children had in understanding and naming those types of gestures. So towards the end of my PhD, I started thinking about where my career would go next. Unsure of my research trajectory within the scope of the contract that I was on as a research radiographer, I started to keep my eye out for alternative opportunities, and lo and behold, a senior lectureship position presented itself at GCU. So aware that the move would mean further pursuit of my theory of mind research would probably not be possible, I was hopeful that I would still be able to apply my research skills, which has proven to be the case to a certain extent. And I'm also pleased to say that subsequent to my research, it has helped underpin an ever-growing body of evidence in the field of social cognitive functions. So I'm quite proud of that too. But in 2002 then, armed with my new research skills and my submitted PhD, my son and I moved to Glasgow. I had some experience of learning and teaching, but I didn't have, in the sense that I had done lectures in the past, but I'd not really had any experience of curriculum design or developing programs or things like that. So coming into the role of a senior lecturer without any academic practice underpinning was a bit of a shock. And there was a lot of language that I didn't understand. Things like subject benchmarks statements and pedagogy and experiential learning and constructive alignment. They were all new phrases to me, and the learning curve was quite steep. there were a whole load of other terms that I also needed to learn just because I was moving up to Scotland. Outwith, for instance. It's never used anywhere else other than in Scotland. Hoard your wisht, and I'm sorry if I said that wrong, but these are all phrases that I've come to love and use as much as possible, even if I say them very badly. So sorry about that. Nevertheless, so I'm saying that the learning curve was really, really steep. But nevertheless, whilst I had a lot to learn through academic practice, I still had an opportunity to do some research. It didn't completely fall by the wayside. I did make some important contacts with Glasgow University Psychology Department, who had their own MRI scanner. In particular, Frank Pollock, who put me in touch with a very important contact, Professor Helen Gallagher. Madeleine has been a collaborator, a mentor, and a friend to me ever since. So I've been able to employ my research and neuroimaging skills in a number of projects over the years, which have contributed to the neuro research group, which is now called Synergy in the school. These have involved different populations like multiple sclerosis, cerebral visual impairment, stroke, and autism. I've done this work with external collaborators, internal collaborators, and PhD students, all of whom I'm really grateful for to have that opportunity to do that sort of work. I was also involved in furthering research in radiography. I was a member of the Society and College of Radiographers research group from 2006 to 2014, and I co-chaired that group for a couple of terms. My co-chair and I wrote the Society and College of Radiographers research strategy for 2010 to 2015, and we were also involved in creating an industry partnership scheme which was aimed at providing pump priming to members of the Society and College of Radiographers to kickstart their research and build research capacity across the profession. Also with my co-chair, we promoted the strategy and through a number of publications and conference presentations so that we added to or making a change in the research culture, which was important at the time because radiographers were not genuinely involved in research, and they certainly weren't leading research. At the time when I joined that particular group in 2006, there were less than 40 radiographers across the UK that held PhDs, and that has changed exponentially in that time, and I'd like to think part of that was because of that research strategy that really kicked things off. It was also on one of these trips to London, offices of the Society and College of Radiographers, that I met my amazing partner, Irvin. We actually met at Glasgow Airport. That's probably a story for the pub rather than here. So I'll move on from that one. So this is basically my trajectory through to where I am now. I started as a senior lecturer. I studied to do my PGC in learning and teaching and got my fellow of the HEA. I then went on to become the subject lead for radiography, for diagnostic imaging and radiotherapy and oncology, and was eventually promoted to being the head of department for psychology, social work and allied health sciences, which was a massive department, and I was ably supported by 4 amazing assistant heads of department at the time. And I got an opportunity to do my senior fellow of the HEA. In 2018, we restructured or refreshed, or whatever it is that we want to call it, and that department was broken down into smaller departments, which at the onset of COVID I was highly relieved about, because it would have been quite a test to try and coordinate all of that. I became the head of department for podiatry and radiography, and at the same time I was invited to become the assistant vice principal for health and wellbeing by the principal, Professor Pamela Gillies. And then in 2021, I stepped down from both of those roles to become the Vice Dean in the School of Health and Life Sciences. So in that time, I've held pretty much every role that you could possibly have within academic practice. I've been module lead, I've been program lead, I've developed new programs, I've helped consult on other external program development, I've written enhancement-led internal review, subject review, reflective accounts, I've written policies and practices to help enhance the student experience. All of these are activities that any of the academics within the room will be more than familiar with. So what I want to focus on are 2 areas I've been involved in. where I've made a positive impact to student experience and enhanced academic practices. And the first of these is my role as AVP, Health and Wellbeing. So the role was to contribute inter and cross-institutionally, championing, I can never say that word, sorry, the university's health and wellbeing commitment to students and staff, and supporting the enhancement of our provision, particularly around mental health, which is a burgeoning problem within across the sector. I took the leadership of mental health work task force, and we developed our vision collaboratively. The purpose was to develop a mental health at work action plan to enable the university to support staff with their mental health, as well as equip them to look after their students and their colleagues. And as Rachel said, I led the development of the GCU Strategic Framework for Health and Wellbeing, which was to facilitate a holistic approach to health and wellbeing for students and staff. So not just for people that have mental health conditions, but across the whole spectrum, recognising that we all have mental health and we all need to look after our wellbeing. The framework was developed in consultation with key stakeholders, research of the sector, and feedback and evaluation from staff and students. And it recognises the wider determinants of mental wellbeing. We believe it articulates a bold and aspirational GCU commitment to enabling a healthy culture and environment for studying and working. And it informs the university's People's Enabling Plan to support GCU's achievement of our 2030 strategy. A number of other outputs from that particular role. I lobbied for funding to build the university's capacity and capability to support mental health, and that resulted in the creation of 2 new posts, one of which was Student Mental Health Project Officer, which is Rachel Simpson, who's now my PhD student, and the Mentally Healthy University Coordinator, which is a secondment from SAMH, who are a big partner with the university. That went to Pete Copeland. So together we delivered courses that were contextualised towards GCU and equipped the staff with the knowledge and understanding and confidence to support the students. So understanding the boundaries of their own role and knowing when and where to signpost when more specialist support was required. We also achieved some funding from Santander's University to create a mental health campaign known as Spotlight On. And this is a series of open discussions and question and answers with a roundtable panel of expert speakers as well as people with lived experience. The aim was to effectively shine a light on mental health and reduce some of the stigma that's associated with it. These discussions were underpinned by online resources, and they've been promoted across the Scottish and FE and HEI networks through the EAUC Scottish Health and Wellbeing Network. To further enhance the profile of GCU and share good practice across the sector, I've co-written some articles for Think Positive. I've co-wrote 2 case studies showcasing GCU initiatives and mental health support services that respond positively and proactively to the findings of the Thriving Learners survey. And then finally, in December 2022, Glasgow Caledonian University became Scotland's first and one of just 5 institutions in the UK to be awarded the Student Minds Mental Health Charter Award, which is a testament to all of the people that are involved in the support services around mental health and wellbeing within the university, of which we have many. The second area then relates to my determination to support the embedding of appropriate learning for the development of the graduate attributes that GCU purports to endow its students with throughout their programmes of study. In this instance, it's about becoming a global citizen. This was the educational quality at universities for inclusive international programmes, mercifully equipped for short. So I was the School of Health and Life Sciences nominated representative on this Erasmus Plus strategic partnership, which involves 7 partners at institutions across Europe, the Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Denmark and Italy and the UK. The project researched and developed the internationalised curriculum and aimed to provide curriculum designers with an integrated programme of CPD and resources. The programme was launched in 2019 at a transnational conference and it was successfully evaluated by external experts, scoring 85 out of 100, which I would consider to be a solid A+. And it's now considered a best practice in the field of higher education. So in collaboration with a colleague from GCU London, Thomas Peshkin, who's now working for QMU, and partners from the University of Groningen, I was involved in the International Course Design module. And we presented and piloted the module at 3 transnational meetings, Groningen, Glasgow and Madrid, in order to evaluate and refine the content and make sure that it aligned with the other modules. I co-authored a thematic text which accompanies that module, and it provides an outline of the theoretical framework and the application of the evidence-based pedagogy that underpins it. I was also invited to co-author a chapter in an edited book which builds on the Equip project deliverables, and importantly it provides some the curriculum developers with some worked examples. And then I also promoted the project through a number of other publications. So finally, I want to share some of my learning on leadership that I've gained from my expertise throughout my career that has got me to where I am today. It may not be particularly profound, but when I reflected on my journey, these are the thoughts that seem to be most poignant. So firstly, commit to your mission. I may not have had a plan at the outset, but inspired by my students, I can confidently say that since joining GCU, I've had a very clear mission. The GCU values and the strategic objectives have always steered this. So the drive to engender contemporary graduate attributes to enable our students to prevail in their careers and make a difference to society has always been at the forefront of my own purpose as an academic leader. Particularly inspired by those mature students who actually gave up jobs to start all over again as healthcare professionals, watching them thrive through the programme and advance to high-level positions in their disciplines is really gratifying. So producing not just fit for purpose, confident and safe healthcare professionals, but further the future leaders and visionaries who will take my profession or their professions to the next level. Engage far and wide on committees and groups. This enables you to influence and shape the strategic direction. It helps you to identify new opportunities and plan for impending challenges. It also enables you to benefit from that informal mentorship and strong role models that you meet with different people that you meet along the way. And these often become staunch supporters of you in the future. In particular, over the years, I think I've benefited from and continue to benefit from some strong female role models and have made some valuable connections that have led to successful and highly effective and impactful partnerships. So seize opportunities, which I think that I've demonstrated I've tried to do as much as possible. These though need to be aligned to the mission and focused on what you're passionate about. My colleague and mentor, Professor Bob Gilmore, has drummed into me the importance of being clear about the impact that you want to make and focusing on achieving that. Be resilient and adaptable. Not everything goes smoothly and we all do make mistakes along the way. So learn from these, make things good if you need to, accept constructive criticism and also help from other people. Pick yourself up and keep yourself moving forward. Finally, always value your team. They are your biggest asset. The diversity of the talent within your team enhances the success of that team. And frankly, your team makes you look good. I've benefited from being involved in and leading some amazing teams. So listen to them as individuals, get to know their strengths and talents, and deploy these to the maximum effect. And develop them to succeed. So make sure that they do have a plan. It doesn't need to be a rigid one, but it does need to be one that ensures that they're prepared to progress. And don't be afraid to prepare them to take over from yourself either. There's nothing more gratifying than knowing that you're leaving your job not just in safe hands, but in a pair of hands that will be able to make your team go to the next level and move even further forward. And finally, going back to the values learned from my own parents, to get the best out of people, you just need to be kind and always treat others as you would have them treat yourself. So, this is my thank you slide. I haven't named all of the people that I would have loved to have named in my talk. 40 minutes goes really, really quickly. But I want to thank colleagues old and new, external collaborators and external colleagues, and my SMG colleagues old and new. My SMG team at the moment are just an amazing group. My dean, led by my dean, Anita Simmers. All of the people that I've had in my teams that I've either been involved in as teams or have actually had the privilege to lead. All my doctoral students and co-supervisors, past and present, all of whom I do learn from and continue to learn from. The people that have mentored me, the people that have allowed me to mentor them, and then importantly, my friends who've been my staunch supporters, and particularly my family. So thank you very much for all of the things that you have done for me. Thank you.
Can I just, by way of thank you so much, Helen, that was such a wonderful, you may sit down. I'm fully aware that I'm now between you and wine. I'm going to keep it very brief, but I do want to just make a very brief closing remark. I thought that was an incredible account of almost a 3-part career, which is huge. It's really hard for academics to be good at all of those things, and I think it's in some ways quite an unusual career journey to go from being an expert in research, radiography and the theory of mind, or that I've just learned about for the first time, to being an expert in learning and teaching and developing programs and running departments, to being a leader in the higher education sector. And I think that's huge, and your contribution, as we can see tonight, has been huge across all of those different areas. But I just wanted to, one of the things that I do when I'm introducing these lectures, I'm loath to give it up because I do love it, but is I ask the speaker to tell me a bit about their career, but I also ask the people around them. And so I went to Anita as the Dean of the school and said, tell me a bit about she did say some things about, the wellbeing work and the mental health work that you've done, but I wanted to read this bit out because I think this is probably more important than almost anything else we can do in our jobs. And Anita said, in amongst all the other things, Helen is one of the most selfless senior managers I've come across. She embraces the university mission and values and is driven by empowering others to succeed and continually improve. And I thought, oh, what a wonderful, beautiful thing to say, and that's how I'd like to end. So please join me again in congratulating Professor Helen Gallagher.